always thought I had a pretty normal family. Growing up in Cleveland, Ohio, we were just like any other suburban family, or so I thought. My parents, Brian and Kathy, were the kind of parents who made sure we had everything we needed, from school supplies to holiday gifts. But as I got older, something started to feel off. At 28, I was finally starting to figure out who I was. I had a decent job as an elementary school teacher, a small but cozy apartment, and a circle of close friends who felt more like family than anything else. But when it came to my own family, there was always this nagging feeling in the back of my mind, something I couldn't quite put into words. It wasn't until that one day, that one moment, when everything came crashing down. I had been invited to dinner at my parents' house, which wasn't unusual, but this time, as I sat across from them, I could feel the tension in the air. The awkward silence was unbearable, and I could tell something was off. Finally, my mom spoke, her voice shaky. "We need to talk about something important," she said, avoiding eye contact. I felt my stomach drop. I had no idea what was coming. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Dad, who had been unusually quiet, finally cleared his throat. "After 28 years, we need to be honest with you, Ellie," he said, looking directly at me. "Honest?" I repeated, confused. "About what?" My mom fidgeted with her napkin. "We regret having you, Ellie. We didn't realize the kind of burden it would be. You've always been a mistake for us." The words hit me like a slap to the face. I couldn't process what I was hearing. "What? What are you talking about?" Dad leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "We just think it's better if you understand that you were never really wanted. You've always been a mistake. You've caused more pain than anything else." I froze. I couldn't breathe. The words didn't make sense, and yet they were clear as day. I had been living my whole life under the assumption that I was loved, that I mattered. But in that moment, I realized I was just a burden to them. I stood up from the table, my legs shaky. "I can't believe you just said that to me," I whispered, my voice cracking. I grabbed my jacket, ignoring the look on their faces. I didn't even say goodbye. I just left. As I drove back to my apartment that night, I couldn't stop crying. How could they say something like that? My parents, the people who had been my whole life, had just completely shattered me with their words. I had always felt something was wrong, but this was a pain I wasn't prepared for. I didn't know what to do, where to go, or who to turn to. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let them see how much this hurt. Not yet. I had to do something. Something that would make them regret everything they had just said. I spent the rest of that night in a haze, staring blankly at the walls of my apartment. The tears had stopped flowing, but my mind was a storm of thoughts, each one louder and more intense than the last. How could they say that? How could they treat me like that after all these years? I kept going over everything they had said. A mistake. A burden. The words echoed in my head, and every time I heard them, my stomach twisted with a combination of disbelief and betrayal. They were supposed to be my parents, the people who loved me unconditionally, who would always have my back. But now, all I felt was emptiness. But then, something shifted. A small part of me, the part that had always been overlooked and silenced, began to rise up. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. I wasn't going to let them define me anymore. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, but I knew one thing. I had to expose them. I had to show them that I wasn't just some mistake, that I wasn't the person they had labeled me to be, and I knew how I was going to do it. I had kept a journal for years, a secret place where I poured my thoughts, my fears, my dreams. No one had ever seen it. No one ever knew about it. It was my escape, my way of coping with everything that had happened in my life. And now, it was going to be my weapon. I sat down at my desk and pulled the journal from the drawer. The leather-bound notebook felt heavier than it had ever felt before. I opened it to the most recent entry, the one I had written just a few days before the dinner. As I read through it, I felt a mixture of anger and sadness. The things I had written were raw and honest, and for the first time I realized just how much I had been holding in. I had written about my childhood, about the way I had always felt, second to my brother, about how I had always tried to please my parents, only to be met with disappointment. I had written about the loneliness I had felt growing up, how I had longed for their love, for their approval, but had never received it. I had written about the emotional scars they had left on me, even though they didn't realize it. And now, I was going to show them. I wasn't just going to show them my journal for the sake of it. I was going to reveal everything they had done to me, everything they had said, everything I had kept hidden for so long. I was going to expose them for what they truly were. I didn't know what I expected to happen. I didn't know if it would make a difference. But I did know that this was the only way I could get my truth out. It was the only way I could prove to myself that I wasn't just a mistake. So I made a decision. I was going to confront them. But this time I wasn't going to stay quiet. I wasn't going to let them make me feel small. I was going to stand up for myself. The next day I packed my bag, grabbed my journal, and headed to my parents' house. This time I wasn't going to walk away quietly. This time I was going to make them listen. I arrived at my parents' house. Later that afternoon, my heart pounding in my chest. I had no idea what I was walking into. The fear of being rejected again, the fear of being dismissed as overdramatic, still gnawed at me. But I had made up my mind. This was it. No more hiding. No more pretending. I was going to stand up for myself. As I stood on the doorstep, I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the doorbell. I could hear the muffled sounds of conversation and laughter from inside. They were probably just finishing up dinner, going about their lives like nothing had changed, but everything had changed. And they needed to know that. I rang the doorbell. Mom answered the door, her smile faltering as soon as she saw me. She had probably been expecting me to show up, but I could see the discomfort in her eyes. "Ellie," she said softly, stepping aside to let me in. "We need to talk." "Yeah," I replied, my voice steady. "We do?" We both walked into the living room, and I could see Dad sitting in his usual chair, reading the newspaper. His eyes met mine, but there was no warmth in his gaze, just coldness, like he was already preparing to shut me out again. I took a deep breath and walked to the center of the room, placing my bag on the coffee table. "I know what you said the other night," I said, my voice steady but firm. "And I've been thinking a lot about it." Dad didn't look up from his paper. "We don't need to rehash this, Ellie," he said, his voice dismissive. "It's done." I felt a rush of frustration. "No, it's not done," I snapped, the anger rising in my chest. "You can't just say things like that and expect me to let it go. You can't tell me I was a mistake and then act like nothing happened. I deserve better than that." Mom's eyes filled with tears, and I could see the guilt on her face. "Sweetheart, we didn't mean it the way it came out. We were upset, and we—" "No," I interrupted. "You meant it. You've always treated me like I was less than Jake, less than everyone else. I've spent my whole life trying to make you proud, trying to be someone you'd love, but it was never enough, was it?" The room fell silent. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. The weight of everything I had been holding in for years was finally spilling out. I wasn't sure what I expected to happen. Maybe I thought they would apologize or at least try to understand. But what I didn't expect was for Mom to walk over to me, slowly, with tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, Ellie," she whispered. "I didn't realize how much we hurt you. I didn't know what you were going through." Her words hit me like a punch in the gut. I didn't know how to react. For so long, I had wanted her to acknowledge my pain, to see me, to hear me. But now that she was doing it, it felt too late. Too much time had passed, and the damage had been done. I took a step back. "Sorry doesn't fix this, Mom. You can't just apologize and expect everything to be okay. You've done so much damage, and I'm not sure I can forgive you." The words were harsh, but they were the truth. I had spent years trying to get their approval, trying to prove that I was worthy of their love. But now I realized that I had to stop looking to them for validation. I had to stop needing them to tell me I was good enough, because I was good enough. I always had been. Dad finally lowered the newspaper and looked at me. You think we're just going to fix this overnight? You think we can undo everything we've done? No, I said, shaking my head. But you can start by being honest. Start by recognizing how much you've hurt me. And maybe, just maybe, you can start to change. Mom wiped her tears, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of understanding in her eyes. She nodded slowly. I'll do better, Ellie. I'll try. I promise. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But I knew that healing wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be quick. And it certainly wasn't going to happen with just a promise. It would take time. Time to rebuild what had been broken. Time to forgive. But for the first time, I felt like I had taken the first step. And that was enough for me. It had been a few days since that confrontation, and though things weren't perfect, there was a strange kind of peace settling in. The family tension hadn't evaporated completely, but I could feel a shift. It was like the weight that had been sitting on my chest for years was starting to lighten, even if just a little. My mom had continued to call me, trying to make amends, and Jake, well, he had remained distant, but I didn't expect anything different. It was hard for me to even think about what had happened with him. I couldn't understand why he had said what he did. But I wasn't ready to tackle that yet. That evening, after a long day of teaching, I sat down at my kitchen table, the warmth of the light from the lamp above casting a soft glow over the room. My journal sat in front of me, the same leather-bound book I had kept hidden for years. The pages inside had witnessed my rawest emotions, my deepest fears, my most personal thoughts. It was my refuge, a place where I could let out everything I couldn't say out loud. As I opened to a new page, my fingers hovered over the pen, unsure of what to write. But then it hit me. I had always written about my struggles with my family, my pain from years of being pushed aside, ignored, and judged. But I had never written about the one thing I had always kept hidden, the one thing that had shaped me more than anything else, my father's will. It was still in my bag, tucked away like a dark secret. The shock of seeing my name completely erased from the document still haunted me. I had always wondered if my father's coldness toward me was because of something I had done, something I had missed. But now I knew. It wasn't me. It had never been me. I pulled the envelope out of my bag and opened it again. The words on the paper still made my stomach churn. It wasn't just the fact that he had left everything to Jake. It was the cruel, almost finality of it. It was as if, in that moment, I was completely erased from his life. It felt like a final judgment. But what if it wasn't? What if there was something more to it? Suddenly a thought crossed my mind. What if my father had left me something else? Something that would explain why he had treated me the way he did? My heart raced. I stood up and went to the drawer where I knew my father had kept old documents. I hadn't gone through it in years, but there had to be something more there, something that would explain everything. I rifled through the papers one by one until I found it. Another envelope, this one marked with my name. I froze for a moment, my hands shaking as I carefully opened it. Inside was a letter, written in my father's unmistakable handwriting. The words were simple, but they hit me like a ton of bricks. Ellie, I know I've never been the father you wanted, but I've always loved you, even if I couldn't show it. There are things in my life, things I've never told you, that I regret. I wish I had been better. Please understand, my actions weren't because of you. They were because of me. And in this, I am truly sorry. Tears filled my eyes as I read the letter over and over. It wasn't a perfect apology. It wasn't enough to erase the years of pain. But it was something I could hold on to. Something that would help me make sense of all the hurt. For the first time, I felt like I was seeing my father for who he really was. A flawed man who had never known how to love me the way I needed. But this letter was his way of saying that. Even in his own messed up way, he did care. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the envelope. As I sat back down at the table, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. This wasn't the closure I had expected, but it was closure nonetheless. My father's secret, His confession had opened my eyes to something bigger than myself. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was healing. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could finally let go of the pain he had caused me. The next few days passed in a quiet daze. I had this newfound sense of peace, thanks to my father's letter. It wasn't perfect, and it didn't erase everything that had happened, but it helped me begin to understand that the way I was treated wasn't my fault. That realization was a gift in itself. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe. But then, out of nowhere, the phone rang. It was an unknown number and I almost ignored it, but something told me I shouldn't. I picked it up. "Hello?" I said, my voice still hoarse from all the crying in the past few days. "Ellie?" came the familiar voice on the other end. "It's Jake." I froze. My brother, the last person I thought I'd hear from. After everything that had happened, after how cruel he'd been at the family reunion, I didn't expect him to reach out to me. I wasn't sure if I even wanted to speak to him. But before I could hang up, his voice softened. I need to talk to you. Can we meet?" My chest tightened. I wasn't ready for this. I wasn't ready to face him again. But a part of me knew that I needed to hear him out, that maybe this was the moment to get the closure I hadn't even known I was searching for. I hadn't expected Jake to apologize or explain himself, but I couldn't just walk away from this conversation without knowing where we stood. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," I replied, my voice trembling. "You've done enough. Jake, you've said enough." "I know," he said, his voice low, almost regretful. "I was wrong, Ellie. Please, just give me a chance to explain. Please." I took a deep breath, closing my eyes. Was I really ready to listen to him? Was I ready to let him back into my life after everything? "All right," I finally said, my heart pounding. "I'll meet you, but I'm not sure what you expect to happen." "Just give me a chance," he repeated. We agreed to meet at a small cafe downtown, a place that used to be a favorite of ours. I hadn't been there in years, but I remembered how peaceful it used to feel, how it used to feel like home. As I drove to the cafe, my mind raced. What did Jake have to say? What could he possibly say that would make this all better? I had spent so much time angry, so much time holding on to the hurt, that the thought of letting him back into my life seemed impossible. But part of me wanted to hear him out. Part of me wanted to believe that maybe he could redeem himself. When I arrived at the cafe, I saw Jake sitting at a table near the window. He was nervously tapping his fingers on the table, his eyes downcast. I hesitated for a moment, but then walked over to him, my heart still racing. He looked up as I approached, his face filled with shame, and something else I hadn't expected. Guilt. I pulled out the chair across from him and sat down, silently, waiting for him to speak. "I've been an idiot, Ellie," Jake began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've hurt you more than anyone else. I've treated you like you were nothing, like you were invisible, and I don't know how to fix it. I've been so wrapped up in my own life, my own insecurities, that I pushed you away. And that wasn't fair." His words hit me hard. I had never heard him speak like this. I had never heard him admit to his faults, to his mistakes. But as much as I wanted to stay angry, as much as I wanted to shout at him for everything he had put me through, I couldn't. I realized in that moment that hearing him say this was all I needed. I didn't need him to change everything overnight. I just needed him to acknowledge the pain he had caused. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said softly, my voice trembling. "But I'm listening. I'm willing to hear you out." Jake nodded, looking like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. "I understand. I don't expect forgiveness right away. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right." I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, I felt like there was hope. Not just for my relationship with Jake, but for my own healing. This conversation, this small act of vulnerability from him, had opened a door I thought would always be closed. Maybe things weren't perfect. Maybe we hadn't fixed everything. But I realized something important in that moment. Forgiveness wasn't about erasing the past. It was about making room for the future. The next few weeks felt like a strange, slow-moving tide. Jake's apology didn't immediately fix everything. It wasn't that simple. But it was a start. We began to talk more, not about the past, but about the future. The tension between us was still there, like a thread woven into the fabric of every conversation, but at least now we were finally talking. And talking was a start. I'd be lying if I said I didn't still feel hurt by everything he had done. The betrayal, the casual way he had dismissed me for so many years, still stung. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore the effort he was making now. He was trying, and I had to give him credit for that. One evening, after a long phone call with him, I sat on the couch, staring at the photos on the wall. My family had always been a part of my identity. The pictures of birthdays, holidays, and family vacations used to bring warmth to my heart. Now they felt like reminders of the people I had spent so much of my life trying to please, only to be cast aside when I needed them most. I picked up my journal again, the one I'd written in for years. I hadn't opened it in days, and now I felt like I needed to write something. My fingers hovered over the pages, but I didn't know where to start. Everything was different now. Everything had changed. The words I had written about my pain, my family, and the years of silence seemed like they belonged to a different version of me. That version of me had been broken. This new version, the one who had stood up for herself, who had exposed the truth and faced the consequences, was different. I was different. I wrote a few lines, then paused. It felt like I was writing a letter to the past, to that girl who had longed for her family's love. I didn't hate her anymore. I didn't feel sorry for her. She had been doing the best she could, and now I was going to do the same. I didn't need my family's validation to feel worthy. I had proven that I was strong enough on my own, and that strength, that courage, was something I could carry with me forever. The phone rang, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was Jake again. This time he was calling to apologize for something else, something small, but significant. He had realized that for years he had been dismissing my feelings, ignoring my pain, and he wanted to make it right. Again. "I know I've messed up, Ellie," he said, his voice sincere. "But I want to try. I want to make things better between us." I smiled softly to myself. It wasn't perfect, not by any means. But this was progress, and progress was enough. As the days turned into weeks, things slowly began to feel more normal. It wasn't a sudden transformation. It was a process. But every conversation with Jake, every small effort he made to rebuild our relationship, felt like a step forward. We still had a long way to go, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. I had healed in my own way. Not because of what anyone else had done for me, but because I had taken control of my own narrative. I had taken the power away from their words and their actions and given it back to myself. The family reunion still haunted me. The words my parents had said, the rejection, the pain, it wasn't something I could forget. But I had learned something important. I wasn't defined by what they said. I wasn't defined by their approval. I was defined by the choices I made, the strength I found within myself, and the love I gave to myself. As I closed my journal that night, I felt a deep sense of peace. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but I had the power to walk it, on my terms, with my head held high. Over time, things started to settle in a way I hadn't expected. Jake and I, though still rebuilding, started talking more openly about our childhood. It was strange, revisiting memories that had once felt so painful, but it was also cathartic. For the first time, we were both hearing each other, truly hearing each other, and that made all the difference. I still couldn't bring myself to fully forgive my parents, at least not yet. The wounds were too fresh, the betrayal too deep. But I couldn't stay angry forever. Holding on to that anger was like carrying a weight that wasn't mine to bear. Slowly, the bitterness began to fade, and I started to make space in my heart for healing. It wasn't about forgetting, it was about finding peace for myself. Mom continued to reach out, She would send me texts every so often, checking in, asking how I was doing. It wasn't much, but it was something. And I could see that she was trying, which was more than I could say for the years of silence that had come before. The more we spoke, the more I realized that she wasn't the enemy. She had been hurt too. She had grown up with her own set of problems, her own set of emotional scars that I had never understood. Maybe she didn't know how to be the mother I needed. Maybe, like me, she was still figuring it out. One evening, after a long conversation, with her, I decided to invite her over. Just the two of us. No one else. It felt like a small step, but it was a step I knew I needed to take. She arrived at my apartment with flowers in her hand, a nervous smile on her face. I could tell she was anxious, unsure of what to expect. But I was too. We both were. "I didn't know how to fix everything between us, Ellie," she said softly, sitting down at the kitchen table. "I didn't know where to start, but I'm here now. I want to make things better." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I saw her as a person, not just as my mother. She wasn't perfect. She wasn't some idealized figure in my head. She was just a woman, doing the best she could with what she had. And for the first time, I realized that maybe, just maybe, she was trying. "I don't know if I can forgive you right now," I said quietly, my voice breaking. "But I want to try. I want to understand." She nodded, her eyes welling up with tears. "I never wanted to hurt you, Ellie. I never wanted to make you feel like you didn't matter. But I know I did. And I'm so sorry." It was the apology I had waited for. But it wasn't just the words that mattered. It was the sincerity behind them, the vulnerability in her eyes. For the first time, I felt like she saw me. Really saw me. "I don't need you to fix everything, Mom," I said, my voice steady now. "I just need you to be here. And that's enough for me." The rest of the evening was quiet. We talked about things we hadn't talked about in years. Memories, regrets, hopes. It wasn't some grand reconciliation, but it was a step in the right direction. A step toward rebuilding the relationship we had once had, even if it was going to take time. As she left that evening, I felt something shift inside of me. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic change, but a quiet understanding. I was healing, and so was she. The weeks after that evening with my mom felt different. Lighter, almost. The weight I had been carrying for so long, anger, betrayal, regret, wasn't gone, but it wasn't as heavy. I knew I had a long way to go before I could fully heal, before I could truly forgive. But that night, sitting across from my mother and speaking honestly for the first time in years, had opened a door I never thought would open again. I spent more time reflecting on my own journey, not just with my family, but with myself. For so long, I had defined myself by my parents' opinions, by my brother's rejection, by the wounds I carried from years of silence. But as I started to step away from that, I realized something crucial. I didn't need their approval anymore. I was enough, just as I was. I wasn't defined by their actions, by their hurtful words. I was defined by how I chose to move forward. Jake and I continued to talk, though not as often. His efforts to mend our relationship were slow, but steady. He still didn't fully understand the depth of what I had gone through, but I could see him trying. And that meant something. It meant that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for us to rebuild. Maybe the bond we had once shared could be salvaged, but I didn't expect things to go back to the way they were. We couldn't erase the years of pain, the missed opportunities, the silence. But that was okay. I had learned to accept that sometimes things don't go back to what they were. Sometimes they have to evolve into something new. And that was the most liberating realization of all. I began to focus more on my own healing, on the things that made me feel whole again. I started journaling more, letting my thoughts flow freely, without judgment. I began to practice meditation, something I had never done before, but it helped clear my mind and bring me peace. I reconnected with old friends I had lost touch with over the years. I wasn't just healing from the wounds my family had inflicted on me, I was healing from the wounds I had inflicted on myself by holding on to the past for so long. One evening, a few months later, I sat outside on my balcony, looking at the city skyline. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the buildings. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. I wasn't waiting for a call from Jake or an apology from my parents. I wasn't trying to fix anything anymore. I was just living. And I realized that was enough. The phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was a message from Jake. "Hey, Ellie, I've been thinking a lot about everything. I know I'm not perfect, and I don't expect you to forgive me overnight, but I'm here whenever you're ready." I smiled softly, feeling a warmth in my chest. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know what kind of relationship Jake and I would have moving forward. But I knew I had done my part. I had stood up for myself. I had exposed the truth. I had faced the hurt, and now I was moving forward. And that, for me, was enough.